Maybe today was my lucky day. That was what I told myself every morning as I stood in my usual spot on the platform, holding mediocre coffee. It was Thursday, exactly 3 weeks since I had left Boston for a new job as a senior transportation planner in San Francisco. 3 weeks of unfamiliar streets, unpacked boxes, and using GPS to find places I had already been twice. I had noticed her on my third morning riding BART. She always stood near the front of the line, usually with a book tucked beneath one arm. Her hair was blonde, but not blonde, more honey than sunshine. It fell just past her shoulders, and every morning she pushed the same loose strand behind her ear before opening whatever novel she had brought that day. On my fourth morning, I noticed the tiny rainbow pin fastened to the strap of Bookwoman's bag. It didn't prove anything, but it gave my very unreliable gaydar enough encouragement to keep hoping. I had seen her smile at the station attendant. I had watched her give up her place in line to a woman with a stroller. Once, I saw her laugh at something she was reading, then glance around as though hoping no one had noticed. I smiled before I could stop myself. It was ridiculously cute. I had butterflies. At 51 years old. Apparently, I was the ridiculous one. I noticed everything about her. Occupational hazard. At least, that was what I told myself. Every morning, I promised I would speak to her. And every morning, I found a perfectly reasonable excuse not to. She was reading. She looked tired. The train was arriving. Mercury was probably in retrograde. Twice, I started toward her, and both times I made an abrupt turn and walked away as if I had suddenly remembered something important in the opposite direction. This morning, she stood 3 people ahead of me wearing dark jeans, a cream-colored sweater, and ankle boots that looked comfortable enough for walking through the city. She held a paperback against her chest. She glanced back. Our eyes met for half a second. Then she smiled. Not a polite stranger smile. A real one. My heart did something deeply inconvenient, which had absolutely nothing to do with my age and everything to do with her smile. Okay, I thought. That was a good sign. Maybe today would be the day. The train pulled in and the doors opened. Everyone moved at once. By the time I stepped inside, nearly every seat in the car had been taken, except one empty seat, beside her. The universe had finally run out of excuses. Unfortunately, a man in a navy suit saw it too. He was closer. I looked at him. I looked at the seat. Then I did something no self-respecting 51-year-old woman carrying hot coffee should ever do before 6:30 in the morning. I ran. Not a full sprint. I still had some dignity. It was more of an aggressive power walk with a brief burst of speed at the end. I reached the seat half a second before he did. "Sorry," I said, dropping into it. He stared at me. I gave him what I hoped was an apologetic smile, and not the triumphant expression of someone who had just won an Olympic medal in commuter seating. He shook his head and moved farther down the car. I placed my bag on my lap and tried to breathe normally. The bookwoman beside me closed her book. "You really wanted this seat." My knee. She looked at me. "The one you sprinted on?" I nodded. Adrenaline. Her smile widened. Up close, her eyes were even bluer than I had thought. Not bright or icy. Soft. The kind of blue that made you forget whatever intelligent sentence you had planned to say. "Are you okay?" she asked. Nothing. Apparently not. "You're breathing pretty hard." I moved with purpose. You raced him. In hindsight, yes. she laughed. I had spent nearly 3 weeks imagining what her laugh might sound like. Nothing I'd imagined came close. The train began moving, and I wrapped both hands around my coffee so she wouldn't notice one of them shaking. "I'm Fran," she said. And just like that, Bookwoman had a name. Finn. Her eyebrows lifted. Finn and Fran? I'm afraid so. That could get confusing. Only if we forget which one of us is which. She smiled. Finley? Unfortunately. She nodded thoughtfully. Finn suits you better. I wasn't sure why that pleased me as much as it did. We passed through Pittsburgh Center while Fran asked how long I had been riding the line. I told her I had moved from Boston 3 weeks earlier for work. I noticed you before I even heard you speak. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. Fran looked at me. So much for subtlety. You noticed me? She asked. Quick, Finn. Fix it. I notice people. It's part of my job. What do you do? I'm a transportation planner. She blinked once. So you study people on trains? Movement patterns, commuter behavior, public spaces, and dramatic races for empty seats? Those require further research. She laughed again, then reopened her book but kept one finger between the pages. What about you? I asked. Do you read professionally, or are you just committed to making the rest of us look uncultured? I'm an editor for a small publishing company near the Embarcadero. That explains the books. I've worked there for 11 years. I love mysteries, hate predictable endings, and sometimes read the last page first when a story makes me nervous. I gave her my best expression of horrified disbelief. That's criminal. She smiled. I like knowing what I'm emotionally investing in. It destroys the journey. Spoken like a transportation planner. The conversation became easier after that. I told her about the apartment I was still unpacking and the coffee shop near my office that charged $6 for something called a cloud latte. She told me she had lived in Antioch for 8 years, had been single for 5, and owned more books than her shelves could hold. When the train slowed near Embarcadero, I realized the ride had passed faster than it had on any morning since I arrived. Fran slid her bookmark between the pages, and moments later we stood together on the platform while commuters streamed around us. Neither of us moved. This was the part where people said goodbye. This was also the part where I usually lost my nerve. What train do you take home? I asked. The 5:18, usually. I take that one too. For a second, neither of us said anything. So, I said. 5:18? Meet me here? Here? By the stairs. I nodded, attempting to look like meeting her after work was an ordinary thing that happened to me every day. By the stairs. She began walking backward through the crowd. And Finn? Yeah? Try not to race anyone before then. No promises. At 5 o'clock, I was already standing by the stairs. At 5:10, I wondered whether I had misunderstood. At 5:14, I spotted Fran weaving through the crowd. She smiled the moment she saw me. Hi. So much for every brilliant opening line I'd come up with. Hi. We boarded together. The train was crowded enough that finding 2 seats together never crossed our minds. Instead, we found a place near the end of the car and stood facing each other, sharing the same metal pole for balance. Every now and then, the train swayed, and our hands brushed. Neither of us apologized. By the time we reached Antioch, I knew her favorite author, the name of the bookstore she visited every Saturday, and that she unapologetically put pineapple on pizza. She learned that I hadn't dated since before the pandemic, hated cooking for one, and had moved across the country partly because I was tired of waiting for my life to change on its own. At the station entrance, we exchanged numbers. The next morning didn't go quite as planned. I overslept by 10 minutes. Parking was impossible, and by the time I reached the platform, the train was already pulling away. By lunchtime, I had checked my phone enough times that even I was beginning to find myself annoying. At exactly 12:17, my phone buzzed beside my lunch, a text from Fran. "Hope your Friday's going well." Yes! The word came out much louder than I intended. I shot halfway out of my chair, caught my knee on the underside of my desk, and nearly tipped the chair backward. "You okay?" someone from the next cubicle asked. I grabbed the edge of my desk and tried to look like I hadn't just celebrated a text message like I'd won the lottery. "I'm perfect." Fran and I traded messages throughout the afternoon. Nothing profound. She asked how my day was going. I told her I was barely surviving it. She sent back a laughing emoji, then told me about a manuscript she was trying to finish before the end of the day. By the time I got home, the conversation picked up where we'd left off. One message became 3, 3 became 20. Somewhere between favorite movies, bookstores, and whether pineapple really belonged on pizza, I realized I'd been smiling at my phone for nearly 2 hours. Then another message appeared. A text from Fran. "Can I confess something?" My stomach tightened. I texted back, "Always." The 3 little dots appeared, disappeared, returned. Another text from Fran. I get tired of texting. Before I could decide whether that was good news or bad, another message appeared. From Fran. "Would you mind if I called instead?" I stared at the screen. Then my phone started ringing. I let it ring once, twice. I stood up for no reason, smoothed the front of my t-shirt, ran a hand through my hair. I almost laughed at myself. Then I answered. "Hi," I said. "Hi." She sounded exactly like she had on the train, only softer. For the next 2 hours, we talked about everything and absolutely nothing. Books, family, the ridiculous cost of rent, why she'd never left California, why I'd left Boston. At one point, there was a comfortable pause. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "How old are you?" I smiled. Leave it to us to spend 2 train rides, a Friday afternoon texting, and 2 hours on the phone before asking the obvious. 51. A tiny silence. Good. I blinked. Good? I was hoping you weren't 35. I laughed so hard I had to pull the phone away. No danger of that. I'm 48, she said. I like 48. Another comfortable silence settled between us. It felt surprisingly nice not to have to fill every quiet moment. My heart had stopped racing somewhere around the first hour. Now it was doing something much worse. It was hoping. I looked at the clock. Almost 11. If I didn't ask now, I'd probably spend another 3 weeks building suspense. I closed my eyes. Please don't let me mess this up. Fran? Yeah? Would you, maybe, like to have dinner with me next week? Silence. Long enough for me to become absolutely certain I had just ruined everything. When she spoke, she sounded like she was smiling. I was beginning to wonder how long you'd make me wait. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. So, she said, I'd love to. When we finally hung up, I stood there smiling, because I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this happy. I'd crossed the country looking for a new beginning. I never expected to find it. On the morning train.